Creekside Youth, what up? It's your boy, Jackson. We're back, another soul study. It's going to be a good one. I'm excited to jump into this and continue this process with you. We've been looking at the soul. We've been talking about how your soul is something that can be healthy or unhealthy, and it's going to have the propensity to be unhealthy while we're in this weird state where so many of our normal rhythms and practices have been stripped away. So we're trying to figure out what it looks like for our souls to be healthy. We've looked back to Genesis, where God establishes this garden dynamic for humanity to live in. And there we see these 4 keys of what your soul needs to be healthy. And those are rest, relationships, restraint, and responsibility. So far, we've looked at rest and we've looked at responsibility. We looked at how you can only truly rest in God, in trusting Him, because His work is the only work that's been finished. Our work will never be finished. His work is finished. That's what we can rest in. And with responsibility, we looked at how God doesn't establish responsibility in our lives because He wants to keep us busy, but because our soul actually craves giving our best. So we've looked at what it looks like to rest and to give our best emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Then last week, we took a pause. We just asked this simple question: how is your soul? Because we want to make sure that we're bringing this home. We're keeping it practical and real to our souls, to our own lives, because we're not looking at the soul so that we can learn some fun facts about the soul. We're looking at the soul so that we can help you develop practices in your life right now, even while things are weird, so that your soul can be healthy. So we're moving on. We're in restraint now. So we're in our first week of looking at what it looks like to live in restraint, which is probably the least appealing of these topics that we've looked at so far to you. So hopefully we can redeem it and show you that there's some really positive things about restraint in your life, and show you how it creates a healthy soul. Today we're going to look at what it looks like to exercise restraint emotionally. So first, let's talk about restraint. We get this idea that your soul needs restraint from the garden, right? So if we rewind back to the garden, we see that in the Garden of Eden, God places this tree in the garden, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's that tree that God tells Adam and Eve that they can't eat from. And generally, I think when we read this story, we look at that and we say, God set them up to fail. God designed the garden so that they would fail. He wasn't doing them any favors. That wasn't a kind thing that He did for them. But instead, God has set up an environment for them to fail. When in reality, it's actually exactly the opposite. God put that tree in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and asked them not to eat from it because that set them up for success. It set them up for success. Not only theologically for us does it establish a paradigm where there's free will and man can freely choose to love God or to not love God. That's an important theological concept for us about that tree. But when we're talking about the health of our souls, what God knows as the creator and the designer of the human existence and soul is He knows that your soul craves restraint. Your soul needs to have the ability. Your soul will only be healthy when your soul can say, I can, but I shouldn't, so I won't. That's an important phrase for us as we're talking about restraint. I can, but I shouldn't, so I won't. See, the I can beginning of that statement establishes your freedom to choose. The same freedom that Adam and Eve had. They could eat from that tree, but they shouldn't, so they won't, right? And we know that eventually they do. But for the full time that they're not eating from that tree, their souls are healthy because they're exercising restraint. This exercising of restraint is an exercising of the dominion that God has established and given to humankind. It's a dominion to be able to say, I can do these things, but not all things are good for me. Because initially, the way that God set up the world to operate is that in the garden, He was going to rule and create in the garden alongside human beings. He granted human beings being made in His image. He granted them this dominion that we were going to be co-rulers with Him. And he was going to say these things are good, and we were going to create alongside him and build and develop, and like things like what we have right now are not sinful, like cities and stuff like that, right? Like we were going to build cities with God. This was the plan that God had and was setting in motion, was that we were going to rule and create alongside him. Which means being a co-ruler means that we have the capacity to create both good things and bad things, and it was up to us to choose to create alongside God, who says these are good things to create, these are good things to strive after, and these are not. And it was ultimately our sinful choice that we decided that we were going to get to rule how we wanted to rule. And so then instead of saying I can but I shouldn't and I won't, we said I can so I will. And see, when you start living a life where you can so you will, it's a life void of fulfillment, void of satisfaction. If you go about your day and you say, I could stay in bed all day today, I could play video games all day, I could binge that show, I could stay on social media all day, I could scroll through all of these online stores and look at all these things that I want but can't have. I could not read my Bible today. I could not go outside today. I could stay on the couch all day. I could fill in the blank with whatever you could do. If you can and you just will because you can, your life will be void of satisfaction, void of contentment, and you'll find your soul in an extremely unhealthy place. So we're looking at how do we get to a point where we can look at things in our lives and say, I can, but I shouldn't, and I won't. Because it's that exercising of dominion that we actually have power to be able to say, even though I could do this, I know that it won't be good for me. So I'm going to choose to do what's good for me. And that brings health to our lives and to our souls to be able to exercise a healthy degree of restraint. So let's look at what does it look like to exercise restraint emotionally. If you remember a while back, we were looking at your emotions like a harbor. Okay, so I'm going to paint the picture for you again because this is going to be important for where we're going. We said that your emotions are like, like a harbor where ships would come in. There'd be docks, right? And ships come in and out of a harbor, right? So we said that the way that our emotions work is that our emotions, they're fleeting, right? They come into this harbor where we are feeling this thing for short periods of time, and then eventually they leave and they'll come back again at a certain point. And so we talked about how you can either be the kind of person who is going to run down the moment that you see that ship come in, and you're going to get carried and swept away by that emotion. You see anger come in and you say, I got to do something about that. And you jump on the ship and you get carried away in your anger. Or you see whatever the emotion is, right? Fill in the blank, and you get swept away by that. And we offered this other way that you could deal with your emotions. That you could deal with your emotions being emotionally responsible is what we were looking at. Standing up on that hillside, overlooking the harbor, and seeing the emotions come in, knowing that they'll leave at some point, and saying, oh, look, that's what I'm feeling. I'm not going to get carried away by it, but I'm going to stay aware of what I'm feeling. I'm going to stay aware of what's going on in my life and in my emotions, and I'm going to see the emotions come in and out. Okay, so that's the image, and that's what it looks like to be emotionally healthy. And so we're going to talk about the restraint, right? If we're looking at what we could do emotionally, but we shouldn't, so we won't, that would be getting carried and swept away by our emotions, right? And here's what I'm going to tell you. This is interesting, but it's not good for you to get carried or swept away by any of your emotions. See, I think for us, when we think of anger, it's pretty obvious. Like, oh, obviously, I don't want to get carried away in my anger because then I could hurt someone, or I could do something that would be destructive to myself or relationships that I have, or whatever it is. And just the same, we try to avoid getting swept away in our sadness, right? We generally try to avoid that the best that we can. But when it comes to things like happiness, we love to get swept away in happiness. We love to run off towards happiness and get carried off in that ship and say like, woo, life is good right now. But what I'll tell you is there isn't a single emotion that is valuable or good for your soul to get swept away on, because you lose your grounding. You lose your bearing emotionally. It's not emotionally healthy. It's not good for your soul to get swept away by any of your emotions. And it's hard to have restraint when it comes to me being really angry, but it's also hard to have restraint when something that's really happy is happening, because I just want to get swept away on that and enjoy that moment as long as it lasts. But here's the thing. Your emotions are fleeting, and you know this, right? Your emotions are fleeting because you only feel them for periods of time. So if you were to run off and get swept away on the ship towards happiness, right? And you're on the happiness ship, eventually the thing that is causing you to feel happy is going to dissipate, right? The party that you're at, it's going to end, right? The season of life that you're in, it's going to change. The thing that you're happy about is just going to lose its luster. And all of a sudden, that ship is going to disappear and you're going to be dropped in the middle of this like emotion ocean, right? You're going to be dropped in the middle of the emotion ocean. You're going to be lost. You're not going to know where you are because you got disoriented, because you got swept away and you weren't thinking. And when you're on the ship, it's hard to see things clearly. And all of a sudden, you've got to swim and climb and crawl your way back to harbor, right? And you get back into the harbor just to see that maybe another happy thing is coming your way, or maybe sadness is coming your way, or anger's coming your way. And then you get swept away on that one and it dissipates and you're swimming back to the harbor trying to find emotional grounding again. And all the while you just end up emotionally exhausted. And here's the great lie. We truly believe, most of us, I think pretty much all of us truly believe that we're victims to our emotions, that we can't control them, that we can't beat them, that we're not stronger than them. And so we're just helplessly bound to being swept away in our emotions at all times. And we are just all completely emotionally exhausted because we're not exercising dominion or restraint with our emotions. See, you have the capability to stay grounded. And remember, I am not advocating that as you stand up on this hillside, you act like you don't have emotions or you don't pay attention to them. But when you stay up on this hillside and you don't get swept away in your emotions, you don't get carried off by them, not only will you not be emotionally exhausted, but your relationships, the way that you talk about your emotions, the way that you understand them, will all be healthier for it. Your soul will be at rest. You won't feel so exhausted all the time. You'll be so much healthier for it because you'll be able to say, I'm feeling really happy right now. Look at that. That's happiness in my harbor right now. I'm feeling really happy. But here's what you know. You know it's a ship. You know what ships do in your harbor. They come in and they go out, right? They don't stay for long. So when you see the happiness, you'll know that you're happy. That's a good thing. That's okay to enjoy the fact that you're happy from here on the hillside. It's good to see happiness roll into town. But you also know that happiness is going to leave. So that when happiness leaves, you don't enter into this crazy depression as you're dropped in the emotion ocean because you're staying right there on the hillside. You see happiness leaving and you're okay. You have nowhere to swim to. You're emotionally grounded still. And just the same as you see anger come in, as you see sadness come in, it's not that you're rejecting that you're feeling these things. You're acknowledging, I am feeling these things, but I am saying I can get swept away in them, but I shouldn't, so I won't. I can get swept away on my emotions, but I shouldn't, so I won't. You get to exercise emotional restraint. See, restraint is great for your soul. It's just like how your parents, they tell you no growing up. You remember that? Your parents tell you no about certain things. Like they tell you to stop eating candy. You've had too much candy today. Your parents tell you no, not because they don't like to see you enjoy candy and enjoy good things in life. But your parents tell you no so that you can learn how to say no for yourself, because at the end of the day, endlessly saying yes won't bring fulfillment or joy or contentment to your life. What will do that actually is healthy no's. Healthy no's. So I want to help you be able to be emotionally grounded up on this hillside, acknowledging what's happening and not getting abandoned by your emotions in the emotion ocean. I love you guys so much. You are not a victim to your emotions. You're stronger than you think. I hope that this leads to a fruitful discussion for you, and I can't wait to see you guys again next week.